I'm going to spend a little bit of time reflecting a BBC investigation that's uncovered a crisis in adult ADHD services across the UK, with waiting lists stretching to over 8 years in many areas. The research suggests a huge backlog, with almost 200,000 adults currently waiting for assessments. Let's speak to Matthew Menzies, who has personal experience with ADHD in terms of diagnosis and treatment. Pleased to say he joins us in the studio. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, good morning.
Matthew, if it's all right, could you just sum up what life was like with ADHD, what life is like with ADHD, but particularly before your diagnosis, and how you managed to actually get one in the end?
Yeah, absolutely. I was diagnosed at 39 years old, 3.5 years ago. Pre-diagnosis, I had a kind of cycle of mental health struggles and periods of time during work life of kind of new career, excelling really quickly, dropping off a cliff edge, going through mental health crisis. That cycle went on for 20 years of working life, and I just never really understood what was wrong with me. That's what I felt like what is it that I'm not being able to fix? What is it I'm kind of struggling with? And anyway, rolling kind of to 39 years old, I was going through therapy for a similar struggle, plus I'd recently become a parent, and that kind of post-COVID period, that kind of compounded that struggle. And I was in a real crisis, and during therapy, the therapist suggested that I explore an ADHD diagnosis. Now, I knew a lot about ADHD. I used to be a teacher, so I was aware. It's just I was taught the old misconception of naughty boy bouncing off the walls, and that was never me as a child, never me as an adult. I'm more inattentive. So I looked at diagnosis within the NHS. I'm from South Manchester, and I was hearing anywhere from 2 to 6 years waiting. And I was in real crisis. I couldn't wait that long. I literally felt like, although it was a huge amount of money to spend to get a private diagnosis, I was at risk of losing my job. I was at risk of relationship and friendships breaking down. I was in a real bad place. My private diagnosis was with a local clinic in Manchester. That happened relatively quickly, in about 4 to 6 weeks. And then I was on a kind of medication titration and spent a few months finding the right fit for me. The difference between pre-diagnosis and post-diagnosis, I went through a whole kind of cycle of realizing who I really was, unmasking, unveiling the layers. All these kind of situations where I didn't feel like I fit in. I felt like I was literally watching from the corner of the room, outside my body sometimes, in social situations even, struggling with work life, struggling with things that everyone else seemed to really find really easy. And I'd masked and created ways to disguise that. And after the diagnosis, I was able to kind of like shed those layers and just realize actually, with medication and with ADHD coaching and just educating myself on ADHD, I found my strengths, and I wasn't just this kind of bag of broken tools. Actually, I was full of strengths and full of kind of characteristics that were really valuable. I just was being squeezed into a situation that didn't fit me.
Yeah, you didn't know how to use the tools that you had.
Exactly. I didn't know they were there, because this whole negative kind of self-talk and this rumination, which is really intense with ADHD, particularly pre-diagnosis, was overwhelming.
You must have then spent a huge amount of time looking back and appraising your life,
yes,
and finally providing yourself with answers to a lot of questions you had along the way.
Absolutely, yeah. There's kind of... Some people liken this post-diagnosis to almost like a grief cycle, in that kind of relief and like, wow, there's an explanation. But then actually like a bit angry, like, why wasn't this found sooner? What have I missed out on having not been diagnosed? And it's such a kind of complex process to go through. But coming out the other side, you kind of, if you're waiting 6 years for that diagnosis, although you can come to terms with the fact, okay, I'm not been diagnosed, but I'm going to accept I have ADHD, you still then don't have any medication support. You don't have any clinical support from kind of the local ADHD teams. And you're basically just kind of in no man's land, I guess, between knowing you have ADHD and diagnosis and support.
But even when you had your diagnosis, you still then had to wait nearly a year, about 8 months or so, to then be referred and taken on board by the local NHS services.
My story was a little bit different. So even though I paid for that private diagnosis, after a few months, I received a letter from the clinic saying the clinician has closed his practice. Right. I was only on the lowest dose of medication at that time, because it was the titration period. So the clinic closed, no support, no medication support. I was really lucky that my GP took on the dosage of medication that I was on at that time, and which kept me going for a few months. But she referred me to the local ADHD service, and this isn't even for a diagnosis. This is just to transfer the titration period. That was 18 months.
Sorry, when we're saying titration period,
yes.
What exactly is that?
So you go through the period of diagnosis, you have your assessment, and you get to confirm you have ADHD. The titration is basically where you are trialed with different medications that may or may not work for you.
Like a holding period to work out.
Yeah, and like this medication doesn't work, so let's try this. Change the dosage and find what's right for you.
You mentioned it was expensive. Can I ask how much it cost?
It cost me £1,500.
Wow.
It was a huge amount of money.
I mean, that's just not possible for a lot of people, is it?
I'm very lucky.
Yeah.
I honestly, I feel so lucky to be able to have done that. And there's just so many people that are just literally stuck and don't have that option.
Well, 200,000 people
shouldn't have to have that option.
200,000 people. We think, but as I understand it, they don't actually keep official figures for those that are in need of diagnosis.
No.
And I just wanted to ask you, I mean, not being diagnosed, those hundreds of thousands of people that have to wait, I guess there is an issue that you don't feel like you're being taken seriously, that you don't have an answer, and that you can't give a reason to people around you who also are trying to understand why you are like you are at times, and you yourself don't know. I mean, that must be so difficult for those people who just need some kind of official confirmation to say, this is why you are like you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I think a lot of people are educating themselves and on almost kind of, I don't want to say self-diagnosing in a way, but almost just coming to terms with, okay, yes, I have ADHD. So what can I do without it? What can I do about it without medical support? And that's where people are, kind of going into social media and the news outlets and just trying to learn as much as they can about their own ADHD through those sources.
And just finally, if I can very quickly, what is the one most important thing you could say to people who were in your position before you were diagnosed, if you could give any kind of advice?
You're not broken. Your environment and the world around you just wasn't built for you, and you just need to find your people and find the space that works for you.
Very eloquently put. Thank you very much, Matthew. Really good to talk to you this morning. Matthew Menzies there on the programme, 14 minutes to 8.